Mushroom Gorge, one of the most infamous tracks in Mario Kart history. In Mario Kart Wii, this track was completely broken by an ultra shortcut, where you could ride the cliff wall next to the finish line to exploit the game's flawed checkpoint system, letting you complete all 3 laps in 20 seconds. In Mario Kart 7, you could get an insane bounce off a mushroom, nearly hitting the top of the cave entrance. However, when Nintendo announced Mushroom Gorge would be part of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, people were worried that the track would have nothing anywhere near as crazy, with even speculation over whether the gap jump shortcut on the final turn would be possible, as Lakitu was notoriously strict with out-of-bounds zones in the original 48 tracks. It turns out though, that not only would the gap jump be possible, but the entire track would not disappoint with the shortcuts, especially in the game's fastest mode, 200cc. This is the history of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's most absurd track. On August 4th, 2022, Wave 2 of the Booster Course Pass was released, with 8 new tracks for players to race on against others from around the world. As soon as the tracks became playable, the time trial community rushed to see how fast they could drive each track, individually choosing their preferred speed class to do so. 200cc is typically less popular amongst the highest level of Mario Kart players, but there were a few 200cc specialists who decided to play Mushroom Gorge on day 1 to see if they could snatch an early world record. At the time, the official world record website only started counting world records 4 hours after the tracks dropped, but of course players were immediately trying to find the fastest strategies possible to get high up on the in-game leaderboard. Immediately everyone realised the gap cut was absolutely possible, and it was fairly easy to do on 200cc. During those first 4 hours, a few different players got screenshots of themselves at the top of the leaderboard, even including myself for an entire 17 minutes. However, the eventual fastest player after the time had passed was Astro, with a time of 106.861, giving him the first world record to be put on the website. Let's take a look at this run to see what strategies Astro was using. He starts off by getting the first 4 coins available, going around both turns regularly. He then drifts off the mushroom to gather a super mini turbo, which he released quickly once he landed. Then he tricked straight across the next 2 mushrooms, getting 2 more coins entering the cave. There are 3 more coins to grab on the next turn, leading up to the final mushroom section. There are 7 mushrooms on the faster right hand side here, but if you just drive straight over them, you will automatically skip 2 of the red ones. However, bouncing off the 3 red mushrooms you don't skip is quite slow compared to your regular driving speed. So Astro did something a bit different to save quite a lot of time. Right before reaching the ramp, he started a drift and gathered a mini turbo in the air, releasing it just before tricking off the red mushroom, which launched him further than normal onto the second green mushroom. This strategy is known as the super bounce, and it saved a lot of time here for Astro. After that, he tricked off the next red mushroom like normal, but then drifted off the final one to set himself up for the gap jump, which didn't even require a hop to get over. He simply used a mushroom, drifted off the edge and released a super mini turbo mid-air, getting him over to the other side with speed to carry into lap 2. In the process, he also grabbed his final coin, so for the other 2 laps he would be able to take the fastest lines possible without worrying about his coin count. Lap 2 and lap 3 didn't have any major differences to lap 1 though. He just took every turn as tight as he could and crossed the line without any significant time losses. Of course, since this track came out 5 years after the game itself, players were already very comfortable with the driving, making the early world records look more refined. This also made picking the character and vehicle combination fairly easy, because Waluigi, Roy or Donkey Kong on the Biddy Buggy or Mr. Scooty with the roller tyres were easily the best 200cc combos in the game for online play at the time, and this track didn't have any specific features to warrant a different combo, so players could stick with the regular best combos in the game. Despite them having the same stats, Mr. Scooty was the preferred option of the 2 vehicles because its hitbox seemed a bit more reliable for the gap jump, especially if you hit the invisible wall like Astro did on lap 3 of his run. Anyways, that run lasted for an impressive 4 hours until Awoken got a couple of records, saving 0.3 over Astro's run overall. The glaring difference between the two players' runs were the gap cuts they took. Instead of tricking off the second red mushroom, Awoken drifted off it, then did a super bounce off the third, losing a lot less time in the air. However, it did mean that a drift over the gap cut wasn't feasible, so all Awoken could do is drive straight and hop over the gap instead, which loses speed compared to the super mini turbo method. This makes the two strategies kind of even out, and it was quite hard to tell which one was actually faster, so both were pretty viable for early world record hunting. Awoken's method did also prevent you from getting the final coin, but thankfully there is an extra coin almost immediately on lap 2, so it wasn't really an issue. The next world record holder Jimmy got a small improvement 10 minutes later using a similar method, but he went much further to the right from the super bounce to land earlier on the road, giving him slightly better alignment for the gap cut, but overall it was once again pretty equal with the other methods. It did at least let him get his coin count up to 10 after missing one earlier on lap 1, avoiding being at a disadvantage for the rest of the run. Astro then reclaimed the record not long afterwards, with a weaker lap 1 than both Awoken and Jimmy due to a slow cave section before the gap cut, but with a much stronger lap 2 thanks to a very fast first mushroom bounce. Ultimately though, there wasn't much splitting these three players. Their driving was at a similar level and there was no superior gap cut method yet. However, Army then came into the picture, one of the fastest time trialers in the world. He got a 106.359 using the same gap cut method as Astro, but his landing on lap 1 was extremely dodgy. Somehow though he did survive and then drove the best lap 2 in any world record so far, with a very nice gap cut that helped convince people that this was the method with the most potential. His next world record got an even stronger lap 2 with another great gap cut, going as tight as possible and getting limited airtime, which is exactly what you want when you're taking this shortcut. The problem is that it's very hard to control how much height you get. A lot of the time you will go too low and fall into the void without really knowing why, which can get very frustrating on such a difficult track to drive. Despite that, Army had done enough to beat Astro by 1/4 of a second thanks to all-round cleaner driving, which is what you would expect from one of the best players in the game's history. So, the time stood at a 106.228 with no major strategy changes after 10 hours. Army had driven the fastest lap 2 and 3 in this run, and only lost 0.1 to the best lap 1 by Jimmy, so it was a pretty strong time. Suddenly, the next world record had a much stronger lap 1 than any other run so far, but the lap 2 and 3 times weren't anything abnormal. The player was Alpaco, one of the best 200cc players in the world, and he had implemented a new strategy between the first and second mushrooms on the track. After getting the super mini turbo, players had just been driving straight towards the boost ramp. What Alpaco did though was get an extra mini turbo before the ramp, causing him to jump further than normal. This resulted in the mushroom bounce giving him more forwards momentum, because the later you land on the mushroom, the less vertical the bounce will be. So, Alpaco had an easy way to save time over Army, but it was only on lap 1 where he benefited greatly from it. This is because on lap 2 and 3 you have 10 coins, so even without the mini turbo you have enough speed to land late on the mushroom anyway, significantly reducing the amount of time it saved. Alpaco also did another new gap cut method in his run, where he took the same line as Jimmy but then drifted towards the gap and did a mini turbo hop to get over, which is definitely more consistent than what Army was doing, but did lose a bit of time each lap since it was a wider line. Nevertheless, it was enough to get the record, but Army didn't take long to get it back after implementing the new strategy himself. He didn't even bother doing it on lap 2 and 3 for the reasons described. However, he did start doing a hop just before the ramp on these laps, and it gave him a momentum boost similar to the extra mini turbo strategy, but not quite as drastic. It did save him a small amount of time though, which contributed to the first 105 run being driven the next morning, a 105.872. He then improved it another 2 times, settling for a 105.824 before moving on to other tracks. So after 24 hours, this time was the world record on Mushroom Gorge. This run had the best lap 1 in any record up until this point. The driving was very clean throughout and the gap cut was especially fast, as he managed to get minimal airtime and wrapped around the invisible wall without losing any time, which is once again exactly what you want. On lap 2, his driving throughout the track was even better than lap 1, but this time on the gap cut he got a higher bounce from the grass and went slightly wider as a result, so he didn't cut quite as much of the turnoff as on lap 1. This also caused the beginning of his lap 3 to be slightly slower, as the super mini turbo didn't last as far into the lap after landing further to the right. His landing from the first mushroom bounce on lap 3 wasn't ideal either. He went a bit too wide and released the super mini turbo slightly too late. Outside of those few small mistakes though, his run was incredibly strong for a day 1 world record, which is why it took nearly an entire day for anyone to beat him. Panda is an Australian player who is well known for optimising any track he plays to make it extremely difficult for anyone to keep up with him. But for Mushroom Gorge he didn't actually need to drive as fast as possible to get the record, because he had a trick up his sleeve. So far the fastest lines on the track only involved one super bounce at the start of the cave section, despite there being 5 different bounces each lap. Panda decided to change that by doing this. This super bounce was so much faster than just bouncing straight off the mushroom, and it saved time on all 3 laps, making it fairly easy for Panda to get the world record with a triple best known split, beating Army by over 0.15 seconds without really breaking a sweat. On the whole, the run wasn't really anything special. His gap jumps were a bit high and wide on each lap. On lap 1 his entire cave section was quite bad with a couple of slow mushroom bounces towards the end, and his driving was a bit shaky at times, especially on the turn between the 2 super bounces where he lost over 0.05 to Army on both lap 2 and 3. This was likely all down to inexperience, so as he got more used to the lines, these time losses diminished and he ended up going on a bit of a rampage. As I said, Panda can optimise a track to the fullest and get such a huge lead over everyone else. As you can see, by the end of the 7th of August, 3 days after the track came out, he was 0.6 ahead of second place, getting the first 104 with the fastest lap 1 and lap 3 driven in a world record at the time, and the lap 2 was only 2,000ths from making it another triple best known split, but this time without any new strategies other than doing a slide off the green mushroom in the cave rather than a trick, which increases consistency whilst maintaining the speed from the trick boost. He wasn't done there though. 3 days later he improved again with yet another best world record lap 1 and lap 2 this time, and then the next day he reduced the record by another 10th and settled with a time of 104.784. This run was simply insane. Nobody was close to Panda's level on the track, and if you watch the whole thing you can completely understand why. The first half of lap 1 was fairly standard. The first mushroom bounce had a good landing, and the super bounce afterwards set him up nicely to get all the coins on the next turn without having to alter his line at all. The cave section was the weakest part of the lap, but that's only down to getting a bit more height than normal from the final bounce, which happened because he landed closer to the centre of the mushroom. Luckily he got a very clean gap jump straight after, so he only lost about 0.06 of a second compared to his best ever lap 1. The beginning of lap 2 was interesting as he actually got a slip drift before the first mushroom bounce, which actually caused him to land even later on the mushroom, resulting in more forwards momentum than normal. If you aren't aware, a slip drift is when you get a drift without having to hop beforehand, and since he released a mini turbo just before starting this drift, getting a slip drift allowed him to get slightly more out of the boost since he was in contact with the ground for longer. Sadly, he did actually land slightly too far to the left, so he got pushed a bit wide by the grass, so the benefit of the slip drift somewhat cancelled out. Either way, it was still a fast start to the lap, and then he got a great super bounce off the next mushroom. The same can be said for the cave section, as he managed to land as late as possible when doing the super bounce for an amazing launch forward. Once again, he landed a bit too close to the middle of the final mushroom for a small time loss, and this time his gap jump was a tiny bit too high, but despite that it was still the fastest lap 2 anyone had driven in a world record. His lap 3 was even better, in fact it was the first 20-second split in the track's history. Basically everything in this lap was strong. He got a good first mushroom bounce and landed into a perfectly tight turn. The first super bounce was great, the entire cave section was clean this time around. Landing a bit further left on the final mushroom helped him get onto the road slightly earlier and gave him a tighter approach for the gap cut. The gap cut itself could have been taken a bit tighter, but that is the only real issue with this lap and it's a very small one. So yeah, if I haven't made it clear enough, this run from Panda was incredible and set to stand for quite a long time with such a huge gap at the top of the leaderboard. "10 days later, there was a new world record set, but it wasn't Panda. The different lap times of this new record were very strange. Why is lap 1 0.5 faster than Panda? Why is lap 2 0.4 slower than Panda? And why is lap 3 0.6 faster than lap 2? What happened? Well, something pretty broken was found. You know how Panda destroyed Army's world record because he found a new super bounce spot? Well, that happened again, but this time it saved even more time per lap. Aless was the one to find this strategy, and Technical was the one to first use it in a world record. So let's see the lap 1 he drove to go 0.5 faster than Panda's pretty clean lap. The second mushroom bounce in the cave was now a super bounce, and as a result the final mushroom could be completely avoided. This saved a ridiculous amount of time. The only downside was that he had to go wide on the turn beforehand to give himself space to do a right drift for the first super bounce instead, because that made gathering the second mini turbo on the green mushroom possible. This is because drifting in the opposite direction to the way you were facing lets you get the mini turbo out quicker, so when you have as little space to drift as this green mushroom it is very useful. So, Technical did this strategy on lap 1 to get a big lead over Panda, with a clean gap jump as well to stay ahead by half a second. He then drove a clean lap 2 with no noticeable mistakes until the cave section. When going for the new strategy, he gathered the mini turbo a fraction of a second too late, so he failed the second super bounce and didn't skip the final mushroom, losing him a lot of time. But since he made it cleanly on lap 1, he was still ahead of Panda, showing how broken this new strategy was. So all he needed was a decent lap 3, and that is exactly what he got. The driving wasn't great, but he didn't fail in the cave section this time, crossing the line with a 104.597, 0.2 faster than Panda. Clearly, this run wasn't going to stand for long as there was so much room for improvement, opening the doors for some new players to try and snatch the record. And this very much happened, as there were 3 new records in quick succession from 3 separate players. Firstly, HGT got the first 3 out of 3 run to save 0.1 over Technical. Then Awoken returned to the track to claim the record for a 3rd time. Then Aless was rewarded for finding the strategy by getting a world record of their own with a time of 104.385. The thing about these runs is that the driving wasn't all that great, but when there is a rush for world records after a new strategy is found, you wouldn't expect the runs to be optimised straight away. The person to fix this would be a familiar face, but not actually Panda. Army was the one to use this strategy to take the time down a bunch, and he had a way to be more consistent with it. He switched character to King Boo because that gave him more handling in mini turbo, making the double super bounce a lot easier to do, since the mini turbo would gather slightly quicker and he would have more manoeuvrability. The downside to this was a fairly significant loss in speed, but since the double super bounce saved so much time, it was far more important to be consistent early on, then maybe later the character could switch back for full optimization. This strategy paid off because he went from a 104.291 to a 103.721 very quickly. Then the next day he got the time down to a 103.6 flat. The driving in this run was really nice. He had clearly gotten used to the double super bounce in the cave as he got it clean every time. His gap jumps were especially fast with such low airtime on all 3 laps, and there weren't really any noticeable time losses at any point in the run. So, Panda's world record had been beaten by 1.2 seconds in just 2 days. Surely nothing like this could happen again. In August of 2022, most 200cc world records would use one of 3 different character classes. There was the Wario class for any track that focused mainly on speed and didn't have any tight turns, the Baby Daisy class for tracks with extremely tight turns and made the most of mini turbos, and the Waluigi class for any tracks that were in between the two. However, Rainbow Road was infamously the only track to use Yoshi in the world record, and the holder of this record was Technical. But he himself managed to change that fact, because he broke Army's Mushroom Gorge world record the next day using Yoshi, and it wasn't to make the double super bounce strategy easier, it was rather to change it entirely for an even bigger time save. As I said earlier, the issue here was that you had to take a wider turn before the ramp so you could do a right drift for the first super bounce, otherwise the second super bounce wouldn't be possible. Well, after Army got his last world record, I decided to see which strategy would be the best one for online play, because you aren't always going to be going for the gap jump in races. That is when I realised you could actually do the double super bounce with opposite drift directions, doing a left drift for the first one and a right drift for the second one, which removes the need to go wide before the ramp. However, it makes you face the wrong direction for the gap jump, forcing an insanely wide line that completely rules it out from being in discussion for world records, but still a pretty nice online strategy. What I didn't realise was that Technical saw this strategy and theorised that if he used a combo with even more handling than King Boo provided, then maybe you could do a left drift for both super bounces in a row, rather than relying on the direction change midway through. So he picked Yoshi, who had slightly less speed but much more handling, and tried it out. Lo and behold, he squeezed out the second mini turbo just in time and launched over the final mushroom. It did only save around 0.1 per lap on average, but that was enough to motivate him to go for the record. Like always when a new strategy is found, the driving wasn't perfect, but he didn't need it to be. All he wanted was a good run that didn't make any big mistakes, and that's exactly what he got. After making it past the cave on lap 3, he played it super safe over the gap jump to close out the run, a 103.562 with Yoshi. In the space of 2 days, the world record had gone from Donkey Kong to King Boo to Yoshi, with 2 new strategies discovered to completely destroy the track since Panda's world record was beaten. Little did anyone know that on this day, the 23rd of August, Mushroom Gorge would not only get a combo switch and a new strategy, but something else would happen that was crazier than anything so far. HGT is one of the best Mario Kart 7 players in the world, but when the booster course pass dropped, he got into the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe time trial scene to try out the new tracks. As I already mentioned, he managed to briefly get the world record here after the original double super bounce was discovered, but that wouldn't be the only time he would contribute to this track's history. In fact, he made a crazy discovery all the way back on the 9th of August, 5 days after the track came out. I don't know why this wasn't looked into more at the time. Looking at the original clip, it clearly had huge potential. After getting his .320, Technical tried it out and realised it saved a lot of time. Not only do you take the turn tighter, but you avoid getting a slow bounce off the mushroom. So he started going for it in his runs, but since it was quite a difficult thing to pull off, he only did it on lap 1 to begin with. In his very first run that made the fence ride, he managed to drive the rest without making any significant mistakes, and it turned out to be enough to instantly improve his world record by almost 0.2 seconds. The next day he got a couple more runs doing it only on lap 1, which was even enough to get the first 102 after he drove a really strong run with all 3 laps within 0.1 of the best known splits at the time. This consistency across laps was largely thanks to how fast he got the gap jump each time. The amount of speed he carried on each jump is actually quite crazy considering how unreliable the gap cut can be sometimes. The day after, he went for the fence ride on lap 1 and lap 2, and to make it easier he switched vehicle from Mr. Scooty to the Biddy Buggy, as the 4 wheels provided a bit more leeway for landing on the fence without losing any speed. As I mentioned earlier, this was slightly worse for the gap jump, but once again it was worth the potential very small time loss for the extra consistency. This change helped him get the shortcut on lap 1 and 2 for a 102.807, a new record but only by 0.14 thanks to lap 1 being quite a lot slower than his previous run. It didn't matter though, because the next day he got a 3 out of 3 fence ride world record, a 102.598. To be fair, this run also had a slow lap 1, but he managed to make up for it with a very strong lap 2 and a pretty solid lap 3. At the time, this run was almost 1 second ahead of anyone else, so you'd think it might have taken a while for people to catch up. Army had other ideas though. He got used to the fence ride pretty quickly and then beat technical on the very same day with a 102.579. This run also had a weak lap 1 mainly due to a very dodgy gap cut that shouldn't really have survived, but it did, and his gap cut on lap 3 was strange as well, as he accidentally hopped off the grass, but luckily for him it hardly lost any time at all. This happened because normally you perform an air hop as soon as you leave the ground to carry momentum and fix your alignment so you can go as straight as possible over the finish line, but here Army pressed the right trigger ever so slightly too early. Either way, he got the world record and it surprisingly lasted for 5 days. The next record wasn't Army improving his own time, and it wasn't technical reclaiming the record either. In fact, it was a new name entirely. Eternal X was a player who had gotten 200cc world records on several other tracks in the game, the majority of which were very unusual tracks with unorthodox driving, such as Donut Plains 3, Sky Garden and most notably Baby Park. And it just so happens that Mushroom Gorge is a pretty unusual track itself in the grand scheme of things, so it suited him really well. His first record here was a 102.543, driving clean lines throughout except for a bit of a high gap jump on lap 2, which likely cost between 50 and 100 milliseconds. Nothing about this run was exceptional though, which allowed Army to come back the next day and get the record back, and this run certainly had something exceptional in it. The lap 3 of this run was the fastest anyone had driven a lap here by over 0.1 seconds, it was incredible. It started off fairly standard, the fence ride was clean with a good alignment into the next drift. The super bounce was almost perfect, getting launched practically as far as possible over the green mushroom. The super bounces in the cave section were great as well. The first one was nothing special, but it set him up for the second one really nicely, as he landed early on the green mushroom, kept full grip for the boost to have maximum impact, resulting in the super bounce sending him way further over the final mushroom than normal, which is of course very fast. He then topped it off with one of the best gap jumps ever performed even to this day. He managed to land on the fence and clip the invisible wall on the left almost simultaneously, which was incredibly fast. Landing on the fence had been done before several times in previous records, and it can be faster than flying over the fence, but if you instead clip the invisible wall when going as tight as possible, then you can get a wall boost towards the finish line, pushing you further forward to finish the lap quicker. Army managed to combine the two and get a faster gap jump than any other, resulting in the lap 3 time to be a 20.189 and the entire run to beat Eternal X by 0.15. Sadly, this run could have been even better if it weren't for an off-road touch at the start of lap 2, but still a 102.398 was a very strong time. At this point, 1 month had passed since the track was released, and it's fair to say it had been a pretty chaotic start to its history, with so many strategy developments that make driving the track incredibly difficult and so impressive to watch. Now though, things were starting to change, because the world record holders were no longer looking for new strategies, but rather seeing how fast they could go if they optimised every strategy they had. Specifically, it was Eternal X who decided to grind the track for weeks, constantly getting small improvements every few days. In the month of September, he set 7 separate world records, but the total time save over Army's run was only 136 milliseconds. This wasn't because he was hardly improving, he was becoming slightly faster and more consistent as time went on for sure, but there just wasn't that much time to be saved in general it seemed. His final world record in September had a slightly below average lap 1, but his lap 2 and 3 were both great, very close behind the lap 3 Army got with his insane gap jump. What you could tell from watching was that Eternal X had easily become the fastest driver across the entire track, he was getting the best possible fence rides the majority of the time, his super bounces in the cave were really fast, and he took every turn as tight as possible. He was just lacking a run with all of that plus great gap jumps, as he often got a bit too much height or a bad bounce off the invisible wall. However, on the 1st of October he was rewarded for his perseverance as he got this run. The lap 1 was a 21.748, and at the time the best known lap 1 split was a .701 driven by Army a month earlier. The lap 2 was a 20.197 and lap 3 was a 20.185. The best known split for these laps was a 20.158 also driven by Army a month earlier. So, Eternal X drove a run that lost 113 milliseconds total to the best known splits, and his time was a 102.130. A very impressive run for sure, but there was an obvious question that popped up in people's heads from this. Would a 101 be possible? Well, yes, of course it would be. The track was only 2 months old and this run still wasn't perfect. His gap jumps still weren't crazily fast and there were a couple of spots that weren't completely optimised. Eternal X knew this and came back a couple of weeks later to try and get the first 101 on the track. He drove the fastest lap 1 and lap 2 in the track's history, but lap 3 did not go to plan. Firstly, his gap jump on lap 2 was slightly wide, so the boost had less effect on the landing to begin lap 3. His fence ride exit was also a bit too wide, losing him a couple of hundredths. His cave section wasn't ideal. He lost grip on the green mushroom a bit too early, so his final launch was a tiny bit weaker than what he wanted. But then his gap jump was tragic. Instead of a wall boost towards the finish line, he instead got pushed backwards, losing him quite a big chunk of time. It ended up being 106 milliseconds slower than his lap 2, but the combined time loss of these mistakes will have definitely added up to more than that. And since the run was a 102.121, the 101 looked like it would definitely happen at some point soon. 6 days later, it looked like there might be a surprise return from Technical, as he managed to get a 21.669 lap 1, 30 milliseconds faster than Eternal X's best split. Unfortunately, Technical didn't manage to get the record back, but he did at least prove that the 101 was physically doable, since the best known splits now added up to a 101.985. So, surely it was just a matter of time before Eternal X got the run to make history on the track. Months went by with no activity. No new best splits were posted, no new players were anywhere near world record level, and Eternal X didn't get any improvements. It took 144 days since the world record was set for anything to happen, but it wasn't what anyone expected. On the 8th of March 2023, Nintendo released Wave 4 of the Booster Course Pass. The 8 new tracks were of course the focus of this update initially, but then everyone realised that something much more significant had happened. In the patch notes of this update, there was one simple line that read, "Improved the performance of some characters and vehicle customizations." Nintendo decided to improve the stats of most of the characters, with an increase in speed given out to any character lighter than the Waluigi class, and a bonus increase in mini turbo given out to a select few of those characters, one of which just so happened to be Yoshi. This caused chaos in the world record scene in general, with long-standing world records getting broken left, right and centre, and of course in the context of Mushroom Gorge it would matter as well. Having extra speed and mini turbo would just make everything faster, so the 101 would be a lot easier to pull off. It was no surprise when Eternal X returned to the track 6 days later to improve his time, but only by 40 milliseconds for a 102.084. This run still had nice driving, but his lines clearly weren't as pristine as they were 150 days earlier. Despite that, it would only be a matter of time before the 101 was done, and the next day Technical actually swooped in and got a 102.025. But then Eternal X responded 7 minutes later with a 102.020, and then on a run immediately afterwards he finally broke the barrier with a time of 101.861, driving the fastest lap 2 ever and getting close to the best lap 1 and 3 as well. The driving in this run is much better than his record from the day before. You can tell he got back into the swing of things after playing for multiple hours. His fence rides were once again almost perfect, his cave sections for the most part were pretty good, and his gap jumps were decent, so the run was actually pretty strong on the whole. It did definitely have areas to improve though. He had no crazily fast gap jump on any lap, and his entrances into the cave were a bit wide on lap 2 and 3 thanks to landing slightly too far right from the super bounce beforehand. No major mistakes were made in the run of course, but it could definitely have been improved if he kept on playing the track. However, Eternal X didn't continue playing the track. In fact, no one bothered challenging for the world record after this run was driven, so it remained at the top of the leaderboard for several months. Nintendo released Wave 5 of the Booster Course Pass on the 12th of July 2023, and with it came another set of stat changes. This time though, there weren't any changes to Yoshi's stats, and none of the characters that did get improvements suited the track, so nothing really came of it initially. However, some vehicles also got stat increases, and a couple of them were very interesting for Mushroom Gorge. The Pipe Frame and the Varmint got a boost in their ground speed, which is the only speed that matters on the track, as there is no water, glider or anti-gravity sections. If you compared Yoshi on the Pipe Frame to Yoshi on the Biddy Buggy before this update, you would see that the Pipe Frame combo had 2.5 out of 6 ground speed, 5 out of 6 acceleration and 5.25 out of 6 mini turbo. Whereas the Biddy Buggy combo had 2.25 ground speed, 5.25 acceleration and 5.5 mini turbo, with all the other stats either being the same or irrelevant for the track. So, Pipe Frame had 0.25 more ground speed, but Biddy Buggy had 0.25 more acceleration and mini turbo, which was enough to make the Biddy Buggy faster on the track. However, after the update, the Pipe Frame combo got 0.25 extra ground speed, giving it a 0.5 lead over the Biddy Buggy. Now mini turbo is the more important stat on this track, and the extra acceleration is a small bonus, but could 0.25 mini turbo really outweigh 0.5 ground speed? Well, there was someone willing to find out, and it just so happened to be a player we have talked about before a long time ago. Astro was not a world record time trialer at all. In fact, since he got the 2 Mushroom Gorge world records on day 1, he had only gotten one more world record on Squeaky Clean's Sprint 150cc, which didn't last for longer than a few hours. He did in fact technically get 4 world records on Mushroom Gorge, because the staff of the world record website decided to retroactively count world records that were set after 3 hours of the Wave 2 tracks being released rather than after 4 hours, since that was the rule they used from Wave 3 onwards, so it felt inconsistent not to do so for Wave 2 as well. Nevertheless, he had never held a world record for over 1 day before, but he saw an opportunity in Mushroom Gorge. After the update dropped, Astro didn't actually realise the Pipe Frame was a potential option, but he was grinding the track anyway to see if he could get close to the world record. As I said, Eternal X's run wasn't perfect, and Astro had always been in and around the top 10 leaderboard, so he wasn't completely rusty on the track or anything. In fact, after a few weeks he managed to climb all the way up to 2nd worldwide ahead of Technical's 102.025, while still using the biddy buggy. It was actually Technical himself who suggested a vehicle switch to Astro, since he had gotten a new best known split lap 1 using the Varmint. So, Astro made the change to see if it would help him save that extra 0.2 seconds he needed. Needless to say, it produced results very quickly, because on that very same day, Astro drove this run. He had done it. 402 days after he got his first world record on the track, Astro was back at the top. He chose the pipe frame as it made the fence ride much easier than the Varmint, similarly to the biddy buggy. The run itself started really well. Lap 1 was only 50 milliseconds behind Technical's best known split, with the only clear mistake being a wide exit after the fence ride in the beginning. His lap 2 was the fastest lap ever driven, a 20.041. Everything in this lap was class, but he didn't manage to keep it up for lap 3, where he lost 0.12 seconds in comparison. In the first half, he once again got a wide exit at the fence ride, then had a slightly shaky turn going into the cave. The rest of the lap was good but not perfect, however he didn't care as it was enough for a 102.832, beating the record by 30 milliseconds. Now you would expect there to be a few more records to talk about in the weeks after this one, since the new combo clearly made more time save possible. However, Astro's run actually ended up becoming the longest lasting world record on the track. This lack of activity had become a common theme at world record level, because the track is so difficult to get a complete run on and has elements of what feels like randomness at points, such as the drift off the ramp in the cave, and more notably the gap jump was extremely frustrating to deal with, since it would sometimes just completely end your run for no good reason. Astro himself was satisfied, and since nobody was challenging him at the top, the record stood for the rest of 2023, and in 2024 it didn't seem likely to change. A few months into the year, someone new had their eye on the record. This player had been in the top 10 before, but nobody was really expecting him to be in contention for the world record until he appeared out of nowhere. His name was 4 Laps to Win. He is most well known for dominating the world record scene on Animal Crossing, but he had always been the best 200cc time trialer from the UK, getting many top 10 worldwide times on a wide variety of tracks. Mushroom Gorge was a track he hadn't played in quite a while. His most recent appearance in the top 10 was all the way back in 2022 when the fence ride was first being implemented. So, when he started playing it again in spring of 2024, his goal was just to get a clean run and see if it would get him back onto the leaderboard. He wasn't even using the pipe frame at first, since he found it slightly easier with the biddy buggy, but once he got a clean run and made it back into the top 10, he decided to switch over and see how it would affect his splits. Quickly he realised it was making a big impact. All of a sudden he was matching the world record lap times and at one point even drove an incredible 21.481 lap 1, smashing the previous best known split by 90 milliseconds. When he got his first completed run after making the change, he went from a 102.4 to a 101.9, motivating him to keep grinding and push for the record. He told me that when he was younger, he used to play Mario Kart Wii with his granddad, and Mushroom Gorge was his favourite track in that game, so 4 Laps really wanted to get a run over the line so he could show it to him. A few days later, he drove a run with a decent 21.599 lap 1, but then his lap 2 was 130 milliseconds slower than Astro, so he didn't think it would be feasible to get the world record. Therefore, he drove lap 3 just to see if he could get a new personal best with no expectations of anything miraculous, but then he did this. He drove the fastest lap in the track's history at 20.033, which was enough to get the world record by 24 milliseconds. His gap cut was unreal, a bit like Army's gap cut from earlier in the video. He got the lowest possible airtime to land on the fence and took the turn incredibly tight. He didn't get a strong wall boost like Army, but it was still one of the best gap cuts ever pulled off. As a result, he could show his granddad he was now a world record holder on his favourite track, making the month-long grind very worth it. He was more than satisfied with this run, so he moved on to other tracks. So, who was going to be next up? Would it be someone we've seen before, or would it be a completely new player taking up the challenge? Well, how about a bit of both? Instead of a 1-month grind, how about a 2-year desire to be the best Mushroom Gorge player in the world? I mentioned at the start of the video that a few players got screenshots of themselves at the top of the leaderboard in the first few hours of the track's release, such as Awoken, myself, HGT and a very happy looking Nino. Naturally, some of the players on the leaderboards at the time were fairly unknown, since basically anyone could have driven a fast enough time to make it into the top 10 within the first hour. Many of these names were never seen again after that, since some of the strongest players in the world got around to trying the track pretty quickly. However, there was one name that would stick around, improving one step at a time as strategies developed and updates occurred, whilst constantly improving at the game to eventually end up challenging for multiple world records, one of which was Mushroom Gorge. Bruh was in 3 of the first 4 leaderboard screenshots, and then 4 months later he reappeared in 10th when Eternal X set his 102.121. From then on, whenever a new world record was set, you could see him somewhere in the leaderboard, slowly improving his time as he got more experience on the track. When 4laps got his world record, Bruh had a 102.142, a very strong time that placed him in 6th on the leaderboard. However, he always wanted to get the world record on Mushroom Gorge ever since he got his first top 10 on the leaderboard nearly 2 years before. The problem was that saving 0.3 seconds is very difficult. Getting every strategy to work for 3 laps in a row is hard enough, but getting a run faster than everyone else in the world was another level. The thing is though, he had gained experience of getting strong world records, since he dominated both Piranha Plant Cove and Athens Dash in the first half of 2024. So, at the start of July, he decided to go for the record on Mushroom Gorge, no matter how long the grind would take. And it turned out the wait wouldn't be too long, as on the 7th of July 2024, he got this run. A 101.762. After 2 years, Bruh had gotten the world record he most wanted, and with such a consistent run. Both Astro and 4laps each had a lap that was sizably worse than the others, but Bruh managed to drive at the same pace for the entire thing, with no clear mistakes throughout. His fence rides all had a good exit, his cave sections were fast, and he had a decent gap jump on all 3 laps. This run was fantastic, but of course there was still time to be saved in places. After all, the best known splits would have added up to a 101.525, of which the lap 2 and 3 time of a 20.022 was driven by Bruh himself during his week-long grind. To get a borderline perfect run was heavily unrealistic though. This world record was more than enough to prove he was the best Mushroom Gorge player in the world. At this point, it felt like Bro was going to hold on to the record for a long time. There was little interest from the very top level of players because it was such an unreliable and frustrating track to time trial, and it was going to take a lot of effort for anyone to try and take the #1 spot. The longest lasting record at the time was Astro's for 238 days, but it was very likely Bro was going to overtake it with this run. After just 83 days, the record had been beaten. But by who? Did Bro come back? Did 4laps come back? Did Astro come back? No, it was none of those players making a return. It was me. I had broken the world record on Mushroom Gorge 200cc out of nowhere. But how did I pull this off? Well, it's all because of the lap 1 I drove, a 21.401. This was 80 milliseconds faster than the best known split at the time, so you'd think it was just the most perfect lap possible. However, it wasn't even the best lap 1 I had ever driven. How? Well, to explain, I'm going to have to take you back to an important day in this track's history. The 23rd of August 2022 was the day Yoshi became the character of choice, the day the double left drift super bounces in the cave were first found, and the day the fence ride was implemented into the world record. After Technical set his final world record of the day, I tried out these new strategies for myself. After doing them for the first time, I thought of another potential strategy to add on to the discoveries already made that day. To me, this looked like it was fast, so I brought it up to a couple of people, including Technical. He pointed out that by doing this you missed a coin, and since it was so early in the track it would result in most of lap 1 being slower than normal. He also said it was unlikely to be faster on lap 2 and 3 since you take the turn really tight anyway. I tested it a bit more after that and it wasn't proving to be worth it, so I left it and carried on learning the track as it was. After that, it was completely forgotten about, hardly ever mentioned again for a long time. The only time it was brought up was when Technical shared a clip of something HGT had found in January of 2023, where he did 2 super bounces before landing on the fence, but this missed all 3 coins and didn't save any time on lap 2 or 3 either, so it was once again dismissed. Fast forward to September 2024, I decided I was going to play Mushroom Gorge because I wanted to finally get a 101. Whenever a world record was set, you could almost always spot me in the top 10, and in the 2 most recent cases, my personal best was a 102.011, so close to the sub. So, I started grinding the track to cut off the 12 milliseconds I needed, thinking that anything more was a bonus. However, I realised that I was actually able to drive very close to the world record splits and even beat them on occasion. So, I felt I actually had a small chance to climb to the top of the leaderboard if I drove an amazing run. It was then that I thought about this strategy I'd proposed over 2 years before, and after watching it back, it looked to me like it had potential, despite the problems brought up about it. So, I tried replicating it on lap 1, and like before, whenever I made it past the fence, I was always only slightly ahead of the world record, so I wasn't fully convinced it would be worth it with the missed coin. However, I suddenly realised that doing a mini turbo hop off the grass was so incredibly slow. Why wasn't I just driving off the road then releasing my mini turbo mid-air to preserve my speed? It was such an obvious thing to try, but I hadn't thought about it up until this point. In fact, in Technical's clip, this is exactly what he did before going for the first super bounce, and even though I saw the clip at the time, I didn't notice this slight difference at all. Either way, I gave it a go, and it became so clearly worth it. I was so far ahead of the world record, and if I drove the rest of lap 1 well, I would stay ahead the entire time. Then I could get my 10th coin at the very start of lap 2 to get up to full speed. With this strategy, I could drive lap 1s around 0.2 faster than Bruh's world record consistently, which convinced me I was going to beat him soon enough. And I was absolutely right, because on the 28th of September I drove a 101.717, completely carried by the lap 1. The rest of my run wasn't great at all. Lap 2 was especially slow thanks to a dreadful gap jump and all-round suboptimal driving, but I was just trying to get as many runs to lap 3 as possible since I needed to just not lose 0.2 seconds to the world record, and it worked. Naturally, this world record wasn't going to stay at the top for long. If any of the previous 4 world records had the same lap 1 as me, they would be ahead of my time easily. So, I decided to keep playing the track to try and hold on to the lead, in case anyone made a return. In the days immediately after, I got an improvement by 1 millisecond, then another improvement by 6 more milliseconds. My mission to break away from the rest was not exactly going to plan. However, I was simultaneously managing to drive really fast individual laps, such as a 21.237 lap 1 and a 20.032 lap 2. I even got a few runs to lap 3 on pace for a 101.4 if I drove even a decent lap, but I just couldn't get them over the line. I got another one of these runs on the 3rd of October with a 21.308 lap 1 and a 20.081 lap 2. Surely I wouldn't throw away another one of these paces, right? I mean, I did get a new world record with a big 0.14 second time save, but there was something that didn't exactly go to plan. The fence ride at the start of lap 3 was nothing short of horrendous. I aimed slightly too far left and it resulted in clipping the side of the fence. Now, this had happened to me many times before, and it is recoverable without losing much time at all, but then I went on and missed the mini turbo straight afterwards, which was such a big time loss. If you compare it with my lap 2 fence ride, it was a whole 1/10 of a second slower, and that one wasn't even perfect either. It also resulted in a wider entrance to the cave section, so all in all I think I lost nearly 0.15 seconds to the best possible start you can have. Thankfully, after this fail I drove the rest really well, so I managed to salvage a 20.183 lap time, which was enough for the first 101.5 in the track's history. Of course, I wasn't happy with that run at all. Lap 3 kept on being my downfall. It was so hard to pull everything off with the pressure of a potential huge time save. So I decided I would keep going until I at least got a 101.4, since that required consistency across all 3 laps. One day later, I got a 101.523, so close to my goal. This run wasn't recorded and I don't really remember what happened in it, but the lap times are actually quite interesting. Lap 2 was really strong, only 23 milliseconds off the best known split. This time, the lap 3 was actually alright. A 20.115 was the 3rd fastest lap 3 in any world record so far. The lap 1 was also okay, but it was 55 milliseconds slower than my previous world record, which would have been enough to get the 101.4 I wanted. I also noticed that Bruh had improved his own time, so I needed to get a better run to give myself some leeway. So I carried on playing, and the next day I got this run. It was really nice to achieve this time, with all 3 laps being faster than the previous record, showing consistency for the whole thing. As always, not everything was perfect. The gap jumps I had in this run were all quite bad. On lap 1 I got pushed back by the invisible wall, on lap 2 the same thing happened but it wasn't quite as severe, and on lap 3 I went way too high. The rest of the run though was actually incredibly strong. I got a really fast exit on the fence ride every time, and my cave sections were class. Especially on lap 2 and 3 since I was quite far on the left, which is faster than being in the middle of the mushrooms, although it does make the gap jump approach a bit more awkward, which I was heavily punished for in this run. Whilst I was happy I managed to get the 101.489, I was also aware that there could still be quite a bit of time saved if I just got some better gap jumps. The best known splits would have added up to a 101.281, so if I just got another run like that but with 1 or 2 great gap jumps, a 101.3 was feasible for me. However, the day after I got my .4, someone said something in the Mario Kart Deluxe World Records Discord server that changed the way I would play Mushroom Gorge forever. The player was Timo, who had gotten 41 world records on other tracks in the game between 2017 and 2022, but was in no way associated with 200cc Mushroom Gorge. So, how did he make an impact? Well, to explain the message he sent, I'm going to have to go back in time once again to the month the track was released. After people found out the gap jump was possible on the release day, everyone was very happy. However, there was one person that wasn't quite satisfied yet, and that was Lando Calzonian. He wanted to land the gap jump, but without using any mushrooms. Of course, there is a line of grass on the edge of the cliff, which slows you down quite a lot. But Lando thought that on 200cc you might have enough speed to make it over anyway, so he tried just jumping directly to the other side. It worked. Of course, the landing wasn't exactly fast, but he didn't care, he made it over the gap. This wasn't helpful for time trials or for online races, but it was a pretty cool thing to discover. However, over the next few months, a couple more methods were found for the shroomless gap jump to actually make it faster than going around the turn, such as this method in a no item time attack run by Minazuki in February of 2023. No item time attack is an alternate name for shroomless time trials, and the community has unofficial leaderboards for this category, since it is a good way for the best players to practice their online lines and compare them with others. On Mushroom Gorge 200cc, Minazuki's run of a 110.411 wasn't at the top of the leaderboard because I had set a 109.248 without using the shroomless gap jump 4 months earlier. However, 6 days after Minazuki's run, a player named Mosha beat my time using the shroomless gap jump over the fence on all 3 laps. That made me want to try it out myself, hoping it wouldn't be too hard to learn. But I remember really struggling to pull it off even once using this method at first. I found it a lot easier to instead trick off the final mushroom, then do a double hop on and off the grass, which lost less speed than Lando's method for a cleaner landing on the other side, but since it didn't let me go over the fence, I wouldn't save time over Mosha. I did eventually sort of get the hang of the method Mosha was using, but after a while I felt like it was still quite slow, since you weren't skipping the final mushroom. This made me want to figure out if it was at all possible to combine the double super bounce in the cave and the shroomless gap jump. When I first looked at my alignment, I realised that the only way this could ever work was if I managed to squeeze out a mini turbo, then do the double hop on the grass ledge, as that would give me the speed I needed and also line me up to go over the fence. So that is exactly what I tried, and it didn't take me long to do this. It was possible and it was fast. When I first got it, I played really safe for the rest of the run, which was enough for a 108.796 to beat Mosha, but that wasn't really my main focus. I was thinking about whether this could actually be used in the regular world record, since it felt really fast. Of course, this would require the mushrooms to be worth holding onto for a different spot on the track, which was a problem as there weren't really any other shortcuts you could take. However, in 200cc time trials, a very common strategy was to use a mushroom at the very start of the race, because getting up to full speed immediately saved more time than any shortcut on a lot of tracks. So, in the World Records Discord server, I suggested the idea of doing a start shroom then taking a shroomless gap jump on lap 3 specifically, because then you wouldn't be getting punished for having lower speed when you land, since you wouldn't be carrying that speed over to the next lap, the race would be over. Army, who was second worldwide at the time, thought it could be barely faster, but he wasn't confident, and since it would just add even more difficulty to the track for a seemingly marginal time gain, it was never really spoken about again. 3 days later, I managed to get a shroomless time of 104.648, pulling off every strategy including the gap cut on all 3 laps, showing that it could be done fairly consistently if it was ever brought back up again in world record discussion. Following a conversation I was having with Falkmani about what the most consistent method was for the shroomless gap jump, Timo appeared and asked me whether I'd tried doing a start shroom and then a shroomless gap jump on lap 3, the exact same thing I proposed over a year and a half before I'd gone on my streak of world records. I had always believed that it would be faster, but whilst I was going for world records using my new lap 1 strategy, I wasn't really thinking about it at all. However, when Timo reminded me about it, I'd just driven my 101.489, so I was happy to finally try it out just in case it turned out to be faster. The way to test this was to drive a good lap 1 using a start shroom, then drive a good lap 3 using a shroomless gap jump, and see if the splits could end up adding up to a low enough time to beat the record. After testing it for a day, I got a run with both of the laps in one, and it turned out to be a 101.615. However, if you substitute this lap 2 for the lap 2 I drove in my world record, the total time would be a 101.459, enough for a 30 millisecond world record improvement. At the time, based on this run, I felt like you could easily save 0.1 seconds or more on lap 1, drive faster in general on lap 3, and get a better shroomless gap jump. As a result, I was pretty confident this was actually a faster mushroom strategy than the one we'd been using for over 2 years. So, I decided to commit to the cause and try and improve my world record with a start shroom on lap 1 and a shroomless gap jump on lap 3. We have gone from skepticism about the gap cut even being possible, to doing it without a mushroom in a world record, with so many crazy strategy discoveries in between from many different players to make Mushroom Gorge one of the most absurd tracks in the entire game. Only 3 days after I got this run, Bruh got his first ever run with a shroomless gap jump, and his time was 4 milliseconds faster than mine, reclaiming the world record only 14 days after I'd taken it from him originally. He got a faster lap 1 and lap 2 than me, but his shroomless gap jump lost him quite a bit of time. Funnily enough, another 14 days later I reclaimed the record again with a 101.336, getting a slightly slower lap 1 than Bruh, but a faster lap 2 and 3. After that, neither of us made any improvements, and over 500 days later, this run remains as the world record today. We did both play the track a bit more towards the end of 2024, and Bruh managed to get the first ever 19 lap on the track in November. Combined with my best lap 1 of a 20.605 and my best lap 3 of a 20.545, the best humanly driven run would add up to a 101.148. So close yet so far to the sub 101. Could it theoretically be possible? Well, I plan to make a follow-up video to this one going into how much time I think could technically be saved on the track, so keep an eye out for it. For now though, the world record is a 101.336 by me, with Bruh in second only 21 milliseconds behind as the only other player with a shroomless gap jump in their run. Everyone else is over 0.4 behind, showing that we are undoubtedly the best 200cc Mushroom Gorge players in the world. And you know what, maybe this was supposed to be the case all along. On day 1 I got a screenshot of my name at the top of the leaderboard, and guess who was the player just below? Thanks for watching.